As I was sharing with the youth department's haunted house, it doesn't take much for me to get scared, and I'm one of those people that I have to watch scary movies with the lights on in the middle of the day. But I am also a huge Walking Dead fan. So, and then for any of you that are fans, I'm not going to give any spoilers out. So I want to go back to early on in the show. And for anyone who isn't familiar with The Walking Dead, it's a story about life and survival after a zombie apocalypse. And in the beginning, they don't understand what is happening. And if you can remember back, they're holding out hope that their loved ones will be cured. So if you remember, Herschel keeps a whole barn full of walkers in hopes that there will be a cure and that beloved old doctor will somehow be able to restore them back to their health and humanity. And even the governor, who we all ended up knowing was a pretty evil character, is hopeful for a cure and keeps trying to find some source of humanity in his own daughter, who he's kept hidden from others. And eventually this group, trying to make sense of a world that doesn't make logical sense, discovers different ways to keep their own humanity. And in the beginning, they thought it was humane to keep their loved ones alive in hopes of finding a cure. But as the series progresses, their sense of humanity changes, and they start to put those loved ones out of their misery. So the writers of this show take us on twists and turns and into places that can make us question our own morals and values and humanity. And if you ever see a bunch of staff sitting at tables on Monday afternoon, I guarantee that's what we're talking about, is the show from the night before. And in some ways, the show to me is like a modern-day parable. It makes you think and wonder about your own humanity and the choices that you make. And it makes you think even about the feelings that surface around the different characters and incidents and things that happen in the show. And in our gospel reading from John this morning, the story of Lazarus functions as a parable of our own lives of faith. And whatever its basis in history, John writes it as an accident in which Jesus explicitly uses to teach those he loves, as well as those standing by, the meaning of belief in God. And many of the strange little touches in this story would not make sense if it were not that kind of lesson. And this acted out parable is designed to impart more than what we might just read or hear on the immediate surface. But on its surface, it's a story about an encounter with death. The beloved brother of Mary and Martha has contracted a lethal illness, and they know that their friend, Jesus, is a healer, and they send out an urgent summons for him to come and heal their brother. But there is a delay in his arrival, and Lazarus dies. So Lazarus is dead. Now we hear words like this in our own lives, and they seem strict and harsh, and they are hard to hear. So sometimes we try to avoid them. We try to avoid the directness of those words, or maybe we try to numb them out. We just don't want to hear the direct truth. But sometimes we do need to hear things directly. To hear the truth directly, even the most painful and devastating truth, because that is a first step in healing. Indeed, to hear the truth can oftentimes be the first step in our own resurrection. That first step, being honest and direct with ourselves and with others with those words that I am powerless over alcohol and drugs in my life, and my life has become unmanageable. We all know how much time and energy has gone into covering up that powerless and that unmanageability. It can show up as isolation, as deceit, as shame and blaming. And just like Martha says, if you had been here, my brother would not have died, we find our own ways to blame and project anger and discomfort onto others and onto God until we are willing to accept what is happening in our lives. that first step is the very first step in our own healing. That healing is reflected in 3 statements that we find in this story. Weep, come out, and unbind him. Weep. The verse from John 11:35 is Jesus wept. And it's the answer to a question often found in trivia games. What is the shortest verse in the Bible? But it's also a very powerful verse because we weep when we know pain and sorrow. We weep when we love and are deeply moved. And we move from that shortest verse in the Bible to maybe one that at least I found is one of the funniest. They roll away the stone where Lazarus has been placed, and they know that after 4 days that there will be an odor coming from the tomb. And the King James Version used to say, "Lord, he stinketh." He stinketh. I just thought that was a great line. So if we take that, he stinketh, while sometimes in order to have a resurrection, matters are foul and they are messy. Getting to that place of being rock bottom, it's foul and it's messy. Resurrections do not happen when all is sterile and clean and smelling like our favorite scent. Where things stink is exactly where resurrection can occur. When it feels like life is at its darkest and at its murkiest, this is exactly where resurrection, where new life can begin. And come out. These are great words from our story today. They are the words that could be on the lips of every one of us today. Come out. Come out from behind the shame of addiction. Come out from behind isolation. Come out from the numbing and the chaos and the fear. Come out. Be resurrected and rise again. These words remind us that it is God from the very beginning who commands in Genesis, "Let there be light," commands in this story, "Let there be life," which is spoken into the pain and the needs of those who are gathered in our story. But those words are also spoken to us in our very own lives. It is a command that creates that which was not there, and it draws us into the knowledge and the hope of new life. When pressed to the edge, when faced with the absolute end of all that we have known or could imagine, and when lives have become overrun by addiction, it is the reminder that we have a God of mercy and love who calls us back into life. That God who calls us to come forth and to be in relationship and to experience the fullness of God's love. The responsibility for life, creating it in the first place and recreating it once again, is God's. Unbind him. Well, the dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face still wrapped in cloth. Unbind him and let him go. So while we gain an understanding of the importance and need for a power greater than ourselves, this scene tells us that while it's God's, it's not God's alone. Creation and redemption are God's work, God's activity and responsibility, but we are also given a role to play. In responding to God's call to participate in the ongoing work of God to renew and restore our lives, we are drawn into God's redemptive work, and we are called to be partners with God in our lives. Making the decision to turn our lives and will over to God's care is a call to become actively involved with God in the renewing and the restoring of our own lives. So do we see ourselves this way? And what would it be like to imagine that through our work, our recovery, and our relationships, that God is still commanding us to unbind and set free and release and renew? Unbind him and let him go. These words are not given to Lazarus. They are given to his community, because now the community needs to assist in his resurrection. Unbind him and let him go. We cannot do this alone. We need the help and the support of others. There are people yearning to live resurrection lives and to become free from the bondage of addiction, but they are still tangled up in their burial clothes. They still have the sheets and coverings of death all over them, and they are still bound up in something. Bound up in those old bondages, old messages, those regrets, the shame, and bound up in believing that maybe they're not worth it, or they don't need or can't trust anyone. And I would guess there's a lot of us in this room this morning that can relate to one of those, or all of them. But there is that desire to live a new life. And yet we recognize that we're still in the bondage to the old life. So this is where we need community. We need one another. It is reflected in the 12th step that having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and addicts and to practice these principles in all of our affairs. It is the guidance, suggestions, and support from others that are on this journey that help complete the action of resurrection. One of my favorite stories in the big book is Freedom from Bondage. And she writes about finding her freedom in the guidance of those that she met in AA. She writes that they said, if you want to know how this program works, take the first word of that question, how. The H is for honesty. The O is for open-mindedness. And the W is for willingness. These, our big book calls the essentials for recovery. And she goes on to say that AA has given me serenity of purpose and the opportunity to be of service to God and to the people around me. AA has taught me that I will have peace of mind in exact proportion to the peace of mind I bring into the lives of other people. And it has taught me the true meaning of the words, happy are ye who knows these things and do them. For the only problems I have now are those that I create when I break out in a rash of self-will. So unbind him and let him go. Those should be the words which are our orders every day, every new day. Unbind somebody. Where you find someone in bondage, where you find someone struggling to be free, unbind them and let them go through sharing your own story, offering support, modeling your own freedom from bondage, and practicing forgiveness. I believe that God can work even through tragedy, though that can be difficult to see and wait for. But God identifies with us and feels our hopes and our hurts. And God acts to redeem and transform our lives in mercy and grace and in love. And in that, God invites us into that activity so we can find meaning and purpose in our own lives. When we refuse to let someone go and grow, when we refuse to forgive, when we refuse to see new life, it is we who are keeping them dead. The community has that power. When we refuse to practice honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness, we are keeping ourselves dead. We are keeping the community from sharing their healing power. So may we be able to hear and accept what God proclaims to us all. Unbind him and let him go. Don't hold on to the past. Don't hold on to what has kept you disconnected. Don't hold on to the death of addiction. And instead, embrace the promises of this program in a life that truly can be lived as happy, joyous, and free. Amen.